Dear friend, settle into your favorite chair with a cup of coffee, because I want to tell you about a woman who discovered that sometimes the poorest-looking man in town might be hiding the biggest secret. This happened back in 1885 out in Wyoming Territory, when a desperate young woman named Eliza Moore had to choose between watching her family lose everything or marrying a mysterious mountain man that everyone whispered about. You know how small towns can be. Everyone thinks they know everyone else's business. But Thomas Blackwood, nobody really knew him at all. What Eliza discovered on that 3-day journey into the mountains would challenge everything she believed about wealth, worth, and the masks people wear. Sometimes the most profound love stories begin with the most reluctant "I do." The third match wouldn't light. Eliza Moore struck it again against the rough kitchen table, her fingers trembling not from the cold seeping through the walls, but from the notice that lay beside the kerosene lamp. 3 days? The red stamp seemed to pulse in the dim light like a wound. "Eliza!" Her mother's voice came from the doorway, thin as the soup they'd been stretching for a week. "He's here." Through the kitchen window, she could see him, Thomas Blackwood, standing in their yard like he'd grown there. Rain ran off his hat brim in steady streams, but he didn't seek shelter under the porch, just stood there, boots planted in the mud, looking at their house like he was calculating the price of the timber. Everyone in Millbrook knew Thomas Blackwood, or thought they did, the mountain man who came to town twice a year for supplies, who paid in cash, but dressed like he'd been sleeping in caves, who spoke maybe 10 words per visit, but watched everything with those gray eyes that seemed to count and measure and file away. "Show him in, Mama." But Thomas was already at the door, hadn't waited for invitation. His boots left mud tracks across the clean floor. He didn't apologize. Her father, emerging from his study where he'd been hiding for 3 days, didn't ask him to remove them. That was when Eliza knew how bad things really were. "Miss Moore?" Thomas removed his hat, revealing dark hair that needed cutting. Water dripped onto her mother's braided rug. "Your father and I have been talking." Her father's hands shook as he held out a paper different from the foreclosure notice, this one covered in his own desperate handwriting. "Eliza, Mr. Blackwood has made us an offer." Hey, Thomas didn't dress it up pretty. "Need a wife, you need money. Simple trade." The match in Eliza's hand snapped in half. Her mother made a sound like a stepped-on cat. "Eliza, you don't have to." 3 days? Eliza said, surprising herself with how steady her voice came out. "That's what the bank gave us. 3 days before they take everything." Thomas nodded once, like she'd passed some kind of test. "Can have you packed and gone in 2 hours. Leave tonight. The talk dies down quicker." "The talk," her mother repeated faintly. But Eliza was watching Thomas's hands. They were weather brown, yes, scarred across the knuckles. But his fingernails, they were clean, too clean. And when he'd reached for his hat, his sleeve had pulled back, revealing a pale band of skin where a watch might sit, a watch he wasn't wearing now. "Tudor, what aren't you telling us? Mr. Blackwood?" Those gray eyes fixed on her, and for just a moment something flickered there. Surprise, maybe, or respect. "I'm telling you what matters. Marriage for money. Your family keeps their home. You get food, shelter, safety. That's the trade." Her father's signature was already on the paper. Had been before Thomas arrived. She realized this visit was just formality. Or maybe Thomas's idea of courtesy, letting her see what she was getting into. "Pack light," Thomas said. "Road's rough where we're going." 2 hours. She had 2 hours to pack her life into a trunk, say goodbye to everything she knew, and marry a stranger who stood in their kitchen like he owned it already. Maybe he did. The banker Mr. Henderson had been sniffing around their land for months, and suddenly Thomas Blackwood shows up with ready cash. "I'll need a few things from town," she said. "Got credit at Morrison's. Tell him to put it on my account." Morrison's was the most expensive goods store in town. Nobody with patches on their clothes had credit there. Another piece that didn't fit. Thomas turned to leave, then paused. "Miss Moore, bring warm clothes. Gets cold in the mountains." After he left, her mother collapsed into a chair. "We're selling you. God forgive us. We're selling our daughter like livestock." But Eliza was thinking about that pale band of skin, those clean fingernails, the way he'd said mountains like most people said home. She struck another match. This one caught and lit the lamp. "Papa, how much is he paying?" Her father wouldn't meet her eyes. "Enough to clear the debt and leave some over. That's $800. Yes, $800 cash. From a man who dressed like he didn't have $8. Eliza looked out the window where Thomas was hitching 2 horses to a wagon. Good horses, too good for a mountain hermit. The wedding took place in Morrison's store. Of all places, the justice of peace sneezed through the whole ceremony, getting ink on the marriage certificate. Mrs. Henderson stood in the corner with her Crow friends, all of them picking at this scandal like carrion birds. "Do you take this man justice?" Morrison asked. Eliza looked at Thomas. He was watching her with those calculating eyes. But there was something else there, too, something almost like hope. "I do what I must," she said. If Thomas noticed the insult, he didn't show it. Just slipped a ring on her finger, plain gold, but heavy, real gold, the kind that could buy a lot more than $800 worth of debt. They left. As the sun was setting, her trunk in the wagon bed, along with supplies Thomas had purchased without looking at prices. Salt, flour, coffee, but also books. She noticed 3 leather-bound books wrapped carefully in oilcloth. The town watched them go from behind curtains. Eliza kept her eyes forward, but she felt every stare like a brand. The ruined Moore girl, sold to mountain trash to save the family farm. It wasn't until they were 5 miles out of town that Thomas finally spoke. "You noticed the fingernails." It wasn't a question. "And the watch tan. And the way you count everything in your head before you touch it. Like money." He made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Most people don't look that close. Most people aren't being bought by strangers." This time it was definitely a laugh, rusty from disuse. "Fair enough." They rode in silence for another mile before Eliza asked, "So who are you, really, Mr. Blackwood?" He adjusted the reins, and in the dying light, she caught a glimpse of something under his collar, the edge of what looked like a very fine shirt, the kind merchants wore under their suits. "Right now, I'm your husband. That's all that matters." But it wasn't, and they both knew it, because men who dressed poor but had rich men's hands didn't marry desperate farm girls for simple reasons. There was a story here buried under all that mountain rough, and Eliza had 3 days on the trail to figure it out, 3 days to discover what kind of bargain she'd really made. Before we continue, please leave a like and subscribe. Let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. The wagon wheel caught in a rut right in front of Henderson's dry goods, where half the town just happened to be gathered. Eliza's knuckles went white on the bench seat. Mrs. Henderson stood on the boardwalk, working a wad of tobacco between her yellow teeth. The woman's daughter, Rose, who Eliza had shared school benches with for 6 years, pressed against the store window, mouth open, like she was watching a tent revival. Thomas climbed down to check the wheel. Mud sucked at his boots. "Well, Mrs. Henderson's voice carried across Main Street like a dinner bell. The Moore girl and her mountain man. Other women materialized from doorways. Mrs. Garrett from the millinery, the widow Patterson who ran the boarding house, each one holding brooms they weren't using, baskets they weren't filling. Thomas worked the wheel free, his shoulders moving steady under the wet coat. He didn't look up at the gathering crowd. Mrs. Henderson shifted her tobacco to the other cheek. Heard the price was $800. Must be nice. Having a daughter to sell. The brown stream of tobacco juice arced through the air, splattered 6 inches from Eliza's hem, close enough that droplets spotted her boot. Thomas straightened, slow, deliberate. He stepped between Eliza and Mrs. Henderson, his body blocking the woman's view. He didn't speak, didn't need to, just stood there, rain running off his hat, hands loose at his sides. Mrs. Henderson's jaw worked the tobacco harder, another stream of juice ready. Thomas waited. The whole street waited. Mrs. Henderson's eyes shifted left, right, looking for support from her crow friends. But Thomas just stood there, patient as stone, water dripping from his coat onto the muddy boards. The tobacco juice, when Mrs. Henderson finally spat it, went sideways into the street. Thomas touched the brim of his hat, not quite mockery, not quite courtesy, and turned back to the wagon. His hand appeared at Eliza's elbow, steady and sure, helping her down. Need anything from Morrison's? His voice carried just enough for the crowd to hear. Got credit there. Morrison's, where Mrs. Henderson had been trying to get credit for 2 years. Coffee, Eliza said, matching his volume, the good kind. She felt Rose's shocked intake of breath, saw Mrs. Henderson's face go purple under the powder. Thomas's hand stayed at her elbow, guiding her past the gathered women, through Morrison's door with its little brass bell. Behind them, Mrs. Henderson's voice cracked like a whip. That ring's probably brass. You can smell the polish from here. Thomas stopped in Morrison's doorway, turned. His voice came out soft, but it carried, Mrs. Henderson, your husband's been borrowing against next year's harvest since July. Morrison's got the papers if you want to check. The tobacco fell from Mrs. Henderson's mouth, landed in the mud like a dead thing. The bridge was gone. Eliza stared at the space where Millbrook's only crossing should have been. Brown water churned through broken pilings, carrying branches, and what looked like half of somebody's chicken coop. Thomas stood at the bank's edge, studying the current. He picked up a stick, notched it with his knife at measured intervals. Then he waded in. The water hit his knees, his thighs. He planted the stick vertical, watching how the current bent it, counting something under his breath. When he came back, mud clung to his pants up to the hip, 4 feet at the deepest. Current's manageable if we cross at the bend upstream. How can you know that? He showed her the stick watermark between the 3rd and 4th notch. Same principle as surveying land. Angles and mathematics. Surveying? The word hung between them while he led the horses upstream, testing the bottom with that same measured stick. His horses, she'd heard him call them something Spanish in the barn, followed without balking. The crossing took 20 minutes. Water sloshed into the wagon bed, soaking the corners of her trunk. Thomas walked beside the horses, one hand on each harness, speaking low Spanish words Eliza couldn't catch. The horses' ears flicked toward his voice with each step. On the far bank, he checked the supplies, moving everything wet to the edges to dry. His movements were economical, practiced. When he found the coffee tin had leaked, he studied it for a moment, then disappeared into the trees. He came back with a handful of pine needles. Can't waste the water for coffee anyway, he said, dropping them into the pot. This works nearly as well. The tea he made tasted like Christmas and medicine combined, but it was hot, and Eliza's hands had been shaken since the crossing, not from cold. She told herself, though her boots squelched with every step. They made camp as the sun dropped behind the mountains. Thomas built the fire in stages, tiny twigs first, then pencil-thick branches, then larger pieces arranged in some precise pattern that kept the smoke thin even in the drizzle. He dug a drainage ditch around their spot without being asked, without explaining. From his saddlebag came a rabbit, already skinned and cleaned. "When did you—" "This morning, before I came to your house." Before, when he'd already known he'd be taking her into the mountains, when he'd already planned for feeding her on the trail. The rabbit went into a pot with wild onions he pulled from the hillside and something green he called lamb's quarters, while it cooked. He sketched in the dirt with a stick to tomorrow's route, he said, pointing to various marks. 15 miles to Turner's Gap, another 12 to Bowers Ridge. We'll resupply at the trading post there. You've measured it, walked it enough times. He drew another line. Water here, shelter here, if weather turns. A circle. This meadow's good grazing. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals. Thomas watched it, his eyes tracking its loops. Storm coming, he said. 2 hours, maybe less. Eliza looked at the sky, cloudy. Yes, but no different than it had been all day. How can you tell? Hawks hunt before pressure drops. Mice hole up when storms come, so the birds feed while they can. An hour and 40 minutes later, the temperature plummeted and sleet started falling. They ate the rabbit stew under a canvas lean-to Thomas, rigged between trees. He'd positioned it so the wind hit the back corner, swirled away from them. The fire reflected heat off a flat rock he'd chosen for that purpose. We should say grace, Eliza said, more from habit than conviction. Thomas nodded, folded his hands. Thank you for this food, Lord, and for safe crossing today. Watch over us through the night. He paused. From Proverbs, the horse is prepared for battle, but safety comes from God. That's not Proverbs. That's Psalms. His eyes opened. You sure? Proverbs says the horse is prepared for battle, but victory belongs to the Lord. Different word. Something shifted in his expression. You know Scripture. Mama made us memorize verses every Sunday. You had to learn it once. Long time ago. Had to, not chose to. Eliza filed that away with the clean fingernails and the surveying knowledge. Night fell complete and sudden. The fire cracked and spit around them. The darkness filled with sounds, branches creaking, something rustling in the underbrush. An owl calling from up the ridge. Screech owl, Thomas said. Means the rain's stopping. A crack like a gunshot. Eliza jerked. Just a tree. Frost makes the sap expand, splits the bark. He added another log to the fire. That rustling earlier was probably a porcupine. They're active at night. The clicking you'll hear later is deer. They blow air through their nose when they're nervous. You know all the sounds. Have to. Some mean danger, some don't. Bear sounds different from elk. Cougar different from bobcat. Are there bears here? Black bears. They're mostly scared of people. Make noise when you walk. They'll avoid you. He stood, checked the horse's tethers. Grizzlies are different, but they're higher up. Where we're going. Where we're going? Eliza pulled her shawl tighter. I'll take first watch, Thomas said. Get some sleep. Eliza lay on the bedroll he'd arranged for her pine boughs underneath, for cushion, canvas over, blankets that smelled like horse and wood smoke. The fire-painted shadows on the lean-to ceiling. She could hear Thomas moving around the camp, checking things, banking the fire. Her boots were soaked through. Her feet had gone numb an hour ago. She'd have to put them back on wet in the morning, walk however many miles in leather that would rub her heels raw. Sleep pulled at her, heavy and sudden from the day's exhaustion. The last thing she heard was Thomas humming something low in Spanish to the horses. She woke to gray pre-dawn light and the smell of coffee, real coffee, not pine needle tea. Her boots sat by the fire, stuffed with dry grass bits, the leather supple and warm. The mud had been scraped off, the lace cleaned and rethreaded. Thomas lay in his bedroll, 6 feet away, eyes closed, breathing deep and even, but the coffee was fresh, still steaming, and on his hands. When Eliza looked closer, was a trace of the saddle soap he'd used on her boots. He was pretending to sleep, letting her have the dignity of warm, dry feet without the debt of gratitude. Eliza sat up, studying this man who'd bought her for $800, who knew Scripture but got it wrong, who spoke Spanish to horses and English like he was counting money, who carried saddle soap in his kit but let his own boots stay muddy. She reached for the coffee pot, and the movement made something fall from her blanket, a piece of paper, folded small, her marriage certificate, but underneath her name, in pencil so fine she had to squint. Someone had written Eleanor, her middle name, the one she'd never told him, the one that wasn't on any document in Millbrook. The third day, the mountains opened up. Eliza gripped the wagon bench as Thomas guided the horses around the last switchback. The trail curved, trees fell away, and the valleys spread below like something out of a surveyor's dream. Cattle, hundreds of them, scattered across grassland that rolled toward distant fence lines, real fences, not the haphazard split-rail things around Millbrook, but straight posts and wire running true as train tracks. A stream cut through the center, catching sunlight like coins spilled from a pocket. Thomas stopped the wagon. "Welcome to Blackwood Ranch. Not my ranch or our ranch. Well, Blackwood Ranch, like something with weight behind it, something that existed before him and would exist after." The road down took another hour. With each turn, more details emerged. Buildings not just a cabin and barn, but a compound. The main house sat on a rise, 2 stories of timber and stone with a porch that wrapped around the 3 sides, real glass windows, reflecting sky, its outbuildings and arranged in neat angles, smoke rising from multiple chimneys. They passed the first cattle. The brand burned into their flanks, made Eliza's throat, closed TB in linked letters. "Thomas Blackwood," she said, "or totally broke, according to the hands." His mouth twitched. "They think they're funny." But the cattle were fat, healthy. Their coats gleamed, and there were so many. Movement near the largest barn. Men emerged from the bunkhouse, 5, then 8, then a dozen. They moved toward the wagon with the loose walk of cowboys, but their hands rested on their guns. Boss, the one in front, a Mexican with silver threading his black hair, spoke first. "Wasn't expecting you for another week. Plans changed, Miguel." Thomas climbed down, helped Eliza from the wagon. "This is Mrs. Blackwood." Miguel's eyebrows rose. The other men exchanged glances. "Señora!" Miguel touched his hat brim. Then, to Thomas, "Sigh." He caught himself, coughed. "The house is ready. Maria's been keeping it aired out." "Sir," he'd almost said, "Sir?" Thomas nodded, started to lead Eliza toward the house, but Miguel stepped forward. "The buyers from Denver came through, left papers on your desk. Later. They were quite insistent about the water rights." I said, "Later." The sharpness in Thomas's voice made Miguel step back, made all the men step back. For a moment, the mask slipped, and Eliza saw something else underneath the mountain rough. Authority, the kind that expected obedience and got it. The front door was oak, heavy enough that it took Thomas's shoulder to open it, brass hinges that caught the light, a brass knocker shaped like a horse's head. Inside, the smell hit first, leather and lemon oil and that particular scent of rooms that held more money than people. The entrance hall stretched up 2 stories, a staircase curving along one wall. Turkish carpet covered the floor, the kind with patterns so complex they made your eyes water. "This way." Thomas led her past a parlor with furniture covered in sheets, past a dining room with a table that could seat 20, to a door at the hall's end. The library. Books rose to the ceiling on 3 walls. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Leather spines with gold lettering. A desk dominated the room's center, its surface covered with papers arranged in neat stacks. Survey maps, legal documents with red seals, what looked like stock certificates from the Colorado Railroad Company. Above the fireplace, a painting. A woman in green silk and diamonds, her face beautiful and cold as January. Her eyes seemed to follow Eliza, to judge and find wanting. Thomas stood beneath it, looking up. "My mother?" The resemblance was there in the jawline, the set of the mouth. But where Thomas's eyes held calculation, hers held something else. Emptiness, like the diamonds had eaten her from the inside out. A mirror hung opposite the painting. Gilt frame elaborate as anything in a San Francisco hotel. Eliza caught her reflection, travel-stained dress. Hair escaping its pins, face wind-burned and tired. Behind her, she watched Thomas pull off his work gloves. His hands were smooth, no calluses, no scars except one thin line across his palm. Hands that had never worked a field or built a fence or done anything harder than hold a pen. "You're not a mountain man." He flexed his fingers, studying them like they belonged to someone else. "No, you're not poor. No. This ranch, the cattle, all of it, you're rich. My grandfather built ships in Boston, came around the Horn in '49, built more ships in San Francisco Bay. My father took that money and built railroads, each generation multiplying what came before." He moved to the desk, picked up one of the survey maps. "I was supposed to build something too. Banks, maybe, or politics. But I watched my mother die at a party. Heart gave out, doing the Virginia reel for the governor's wife. She was 40 petite." His finger traced a property line on the map. "Father lasted another 6 years. Shot himself in this room, left a note saying he was tired." Eliza's reflection in the mirror looked small, shabby, out of place among the leather and crystal. "So you ran away?" "I bought land. Built something useful instead of decorative. Raised cattle instead of capital." He set down the map. "For 5 years, I was just Thomas, who lived in the mountains. Thomas who paid cash, Thomas who didn't matter to anyone important. Then why?" A knock interrupted. A Mexican woman appeared in the doorway, round-faced and flour-dusted. "Senor Blackwood, forgive me, but Mr. Whitmore is here." Thomas's whole body changed, shoulders squaring, spine straightening. The authority Eliza had glimpsed outside crystallized into something harder. "Where?" "The front parlor, Tisheba. He says he's come about the marriage." "How could he know already?" Maria's eyes flicked to Eliza, back to Thomas. "He says Mrs. Henderson sent a telegram yesterday. To your aunt in San Francisco." Thomas's hands curled into fists, the smooth, uncalloused hands of a gentleman. "Tell him I'll be there shortly." Maria disappeared. Thomas stood perfectly still, staring at the portrait of his mother. "My father's will," he said finally, "requires me to marry by my 30th birthday or forfeit everything to his railroad partners. That birthday was 2 weeks ago." "So you bought a wife?" "I married one. The buying was just to make it quick." He moved to a cabinet, pulled out a leather portfolio. Whitmore is my aunt's lawyer. He's here to challenge the validity of the marriage." "On what grounds?" Thomas opened the portfolio. Inside, legal documents covered with dense text. At the top of one, Eliza read, "Petition for declaration of mental incompetence. On the grounds," Thomas said, "that I'm insane." The clock on the mantel chimed 4 o'clock. Through the window, Eliza could see riders approaching, 3 men in city suits, incongruous as undertakers at a barn dance. Thomas rolled his shoulders, and the gentleman disappeared. The mountain man was back, all slouched posture and careful grammar. "Whatever happens," he said, "don't tell them about Eleanor." "What?" But he was already walking toward the parlor, toward the lawyers, his smooth hands hidden again inside those lying work gloves. The guest room door locked from the inside with a brass key that weighed more than Papa's pocket watch. Eliza turned it twice, listening to the tumbler's folly. Through the oak panels came voices, Thomas's low rumble, then sharper tones, city voices, lawyer voices, the kind that carved up farms and families with paper instead of plows. Her trunk sat in the corner where someone had placed it. Water stains marked the leather where the river crossing had soaked through. She opened it. Everything smelled like wet wool and disappointment. The bed was too soft, the kind of soft that rich people thought meant comfort, but actually meant your back would ache by morning. She sat on its edge, unlacing her boots. Her stockings peeled away from blisters that had formed, burst, formed again. 3 days of walking when the wagon got stuck. 3 days of pretending her feet weren't bleeding into good leather. The bruises ran up her ribs where the wagon bench had beaten against her for 40 miles. Purple-green marks like pressed flowers in a book nobody would read. She counted them in the mirror, 7 on the left side, 5 on the right. A dozen more on her legs from climbing over rocks when Thomas scouted the trail. Downstairs, something crashed. Glass, from the sound. Eliza pressed her ear to the floor. Thomas's voice came through the boards. "Get out!" Not shouted. Quiet, the kind of quiet that made men back toward doors. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving fast. The front doors slammed, shook the whole house. Then nothing. Just the big clock in the hallway counting off seconds like a pulse. She must have slept. The room was dark when knocking woke her. Mrs. Blackwood. Not Thomas. The Mexican woman, Maria. "Senor Thomas says breakfast is ready." The sky through the window showed that blue-black before dawn. Liza dressed in her other dress, the one that didn't smell like horse, and followed the scent of bacon down unfamiliar stairs. Thomas stood at the massive iron stove, working 3 skillets at once, bacon in one, eggs in another, something that looked like potatoes in the third. His sleeves were rolled up, showing forearms that had no business being that steady at a stove. "How do you like your eggs? You cook. Maria doesn't come until 6. Learn to feed myself or starve." He flipped an egg without looking at it. Also learned that lawyers leave faster when you don't offer them breakfast. The bacon popped, sending grease across the back of his hand. He didn't flinch. Eliza sat at the kitchen table rough pine, not like the fancy dining room furniture, working furniture. What did they want? To have me declared incompetent. Can't inherit if I'm crazy. Marriage isn't valid if I'm crazy. He slid eggs onto a plate, added bacon, potatoes, fried with onions. Eat. The food was good, better than good. The eggs had things in them, herbs she didn't recognize, cheese that wasn't from any cow she knew. "French cheese," Thomas said, reading her face. "Miguel's brother brings it from Santa Fe. You have French cheese but dress like a saddle tramp. Saddle tramps don't get bothered by lawyers, usually." He poured coffee, real coffee, black as ink, and strong enough to float horseshoes. "My father's will has conditions. Must maintain certain standards of living. must participate in society, must marry an appropriate woman of good family. I'm not good family. No, you're better. You're invisible family. No connections to San Francisco. No ambitions for my money. He pulled a letter from his shirt pocket, yellowed and soft from handling. 2 years ago, my aunt sent this. The letter was written in a woman's hand, all loops and flourishes. My dear Thomas, your isolation has gone on long enough. I have arranged meetings with several suitable young ladies, including Judge Morrison's daughter and the younger Haversham girl. Any would make an acceptable Mrs. Blackwood. Choose quickly, or I shall choose for you. Your loving Aunt Margaret at the bottom. In Thomas's harder script, find a woman who doesn't know your name. So you found me. I found a family about to lose everything, a father desperate enough to take any offer, a daughter with no choice. He took back the letter, folded it carefully. I'm not proud of it, but not ashamed either. No. He stood. Come on, something you need to see. The sun was coming up, painting the ranch gold and pink. They walked past the barns where men were already working, past the chickens scratching in their yard, to a small fenced area behind a stand of cottonwoods. Headstones, maybe 20 of them, carved from local sandstone. Some had names, some just dates. One near the front read, James Chen, 1807 to 1880, died saving horses from fire. Railroad workers mostly, Thomas said. Men who got hurt and couldn't work. Came here to die somewhere clean. I buried them proper, no charge. A smaller stone caught Eliza's eye. Baby Martinez, 3 days old, 80, Maria's grandson, born too early. You paid for the stone. Paid for the doctor to come from Denver. Didn't help. He moved to the next row. This one was a drifter, froze to death in the barn. This one got kicked by a horse. This one just got old. At the back, fresh-turned earth marked a new grave. No stone yet. Who? Don't know his name. Found him shot on the south pasture last month. Probably a rustler, but still. Thomas pulled off his hat. Everyone deserves proper burial. They stood quiet for a moment. Somewhere, a meadowlark started singing. There's more, Thomas said. The schoolhouse sat on a rise overlooking the valley. One room, good windows, a bell tower that had a bell. Inside, desks arranged in neat rows, slates stacked on shelves, books, readers, arithmetic, even geography. A globe on the teacher's desk. Built it 3 years ago, Thomas said. Can't get a teacher to come. Too far from town, they say. Too isolated. The workers have children, 17 at last count. Miguel's trying to teach them letters, but he never got past 3rd grade himself. Eliza ran her hand over the books. Real books, new books, McGuffey's Readers, Ray's Arithmetic, a dictionary thick as her fist. My mother could barely read, Thomas said. Learned enough to sign her name, follow a recipe. Father thought education was wasted on women. She died believing that. Is that why? Senor Thomas, a little girl, maybe 7, dark braids flying, ran up the schoolhouse steps. She held a fistful of yellow flowers, desert marigolds, still wet with the dew. For the senora, she said, pushing them at Eliza. Her English was careful, practiced, welcome flowers. Behind her came other children, pecking around the doorframe, boys in patched pants, girls in flour-sack dresses, all of them thin, all of them brown, all of them looking at the schoolhouse like it was Christmas and church combined. This is Rosa, Thomas said, Maria's daughter. She's been practicing that sentence for 2 days. Said Rosa beamed. Then, in Spanish, too fast for Eliza to follow, she chattered something at Thomas. He answered in the same language, his voice different, warmer. Easier. The children crept closer. One boy, probably 10, held a slate with numbers chalked on it. Is this right, Senor Thomas? Thomas looked. Almost. 7 times 8 is 56, not 54. The boy's face fell. But you got all the others right, Thomas added. That's better than last week. More children now, showing Thomas their work, letters copied painstakingly, numbers added and subtracted. One girl had drawn a horse that looked more like a dog, but Thomas studied it seriously. Good proportions, he said. Maybe make the legs longer next time. Watching him with those children, Eliza saw it clearly. The man who'd built a schoolhouse nobody would staff, who taught multiplication to cowboys' sons, who buried strangers and named his horses in Spanish and kept French cheese in his kitchen, but wore clothes that made him invisible. They love you, she said. They love that someone sees them. He touched Rosa's head gently. Most ranchers won't let Mexican children near their property, much less build them schools. So you married me to keep all this. I married you because the alternative was letting my aunt sell it all to the railroad. They'd clear-cut the land, dam the stream, move these families off. He looked at the children, now playing some game with rocks and string. I've done enough taking in my life. Thought maybe I could try giving something back. And if they declare you incompetent. Thomas watched Rosa teaching the younger girls her welcome sentence, their mouths carefully forming the foreign words. Then I guess I better start acting sane. But his hands, those smooth, uncalloused gentleman's hands, were shaking. The carriage wheels ground against gravel like teeth on bone. Eliza watched from the library window as 4 men climbed out. The first wore a suit that cost more than her family's farm gray wool. Every line perfect. The other 3 had the thick necks and careful eyes of men paid to hurt people legally. Thomas stood at his desk, running his thumb along the edge of a knife, back and forth against a piece of pine, peeling off curls of wood that fell to the Turkish carpet like tiny question marks. Mr. Blackwood. The gray suit didn't knock, just walked in like he owned the place. Maybe he would. Soon enough, I'm Harrison Whitmore, representing your aunt's interests. Behind him, the 3 guards spread out. One stopped at the bookshelf, running his finger along the spines. Another studied the painting of Thomas's mother. The 3rd pulled out a notebook, started writing. Inventory? Thomas asked. His thumb never stopped moving on the knife. Prudent preparation. Whitmore set his leather case on the desk, covering Thomas's survey maps. Your aunt is concerned about your mental state, living like a vagrant when you have resources, marrying beneath your station, classic symptoms of dementia. The knife bit deeper. The pine split. Mrs. Blackwood. Whitmore turned to Eliza. May we speak privately? No, Thomas said. I wasn't asking you. Whitmore pulled out a document, thick as a Bible. Mrs. Blackwood, I have here a generous offer, $5,000, deposited in your name at any bank you choose. All you need to do is sign this annulment petition stating the marriage was never consummated. The guard at the bookshelf pulled out a volume leather-bound, gold-edged. He opened it, checking something against his notebook. First edition Melville, he said. $400 minimum. Whitmore smiled like a cat with cream on its whiskers. As you can see, we're already assessing the estate's value. After Mr. Blackwood is declared incompetent, everything will be sold. The ranch, the livestock, the contents of this house. Your husband will be placed in a facility that can properly care for someone with his challenges. The pine in Thomas's hands was nothing but splinters now. He picked up another piece. $5,000. Whitmore repeated, "More money than you've seen in your lifetime, enough to save your family's farm and live comfortably for years." Eliza took the document. The paper was heavy, expensive, covered in legal language that wrapped around itself like barbed wire. But she could read enough. The marriage was never consummated because the bride was coerced. The groom was of unsound mind. "There's a pen," Whitmore said, producing a gold fountain pen from his vest. The guard by the painting said, "James McNeil Whistler, Woman in Green, commissioned piece, 1871, 2000, maybe more." That was Thomas's mother. They were pricing his mother. Eliza looked at Thomas. He was carving the new piece of pine into nothing, his face blank as untouched paper. But a muscle jumped in his jaw with each breath. She took Whitmore's pen. The gold was warm, heavy, real gold, like Thomas's wedding ring that still sat loose on her finger. "Mrs. Blackwood," Whitmore said, "you're making the right choice." Eliza drew the pen across the page, once, twice. The ink flowed black and smooth. Then she kept drawing, not her signature, just lines. Back and forth, destroying the carefully typed words, obliterating whole paragraphs under spreading ink. "What are you?" She tore the page, a clean sound satisfying. The document split down the middle. She tore again, smaller and smaller pieces, until her hands were full of expensive confetti. The fireplace was cold, but kindling sat ready in the iron basket. Eliza fed the papers to the grate, piece by piece. Whitmore lunged forward, but Thomas stood, just stood. The lawyer stopped like he'd hit a wall. "You stupid girl," Whitmore said. "You have no idea what you've just cost yourself." "I know what things cost." Eliza struck a match. The papers caught instantly, expensive paper burning faster than cheap. "I watched my mother count pennies until her fingers bled, watched my father shrink himself to nothing, trying to make the numbers work. I know exactly what things cost." The guard with the notebook said, "Persian rug, main library, 17 by 20 feet, $800. "Get out." Thomas's voice came out soft. "We have every right to inventory." The knife left Thomas's hand so fast, Eliza only saw the result blade buried 2 inches deep in the desk, still vibrating, an inch from Whitmore's fingers. "I said get out." Whitmore jerked his hand back. "This is assault. I'll have you arrested." "Try it." Thomas pulled the knife free, went back to whittling. "Sheriff owes me 3 favors. Judge owes me 5. "You're insane." "Maybe, but I'm insane with very good lawyers, my own lawyers. From Denver." Another curl of pine hit the floor. "They'll be here Tuesday." Whitmore's face went red, then purple. "Your aunt will have you committed. She has doctors ready to testify that I live simply, that I dress poor, that I married outside San Francisco society." Thomas held up the wooden stick he'd been carving. It was sharpened to a point like a stake. "Eccentric isn't insane, Whitmore. Any real doctor will testify to that. You cannot fight the railroad. They own judges, governors. They don't own me." The 2 men stared at each other. Whitmore's guards shifted, hands moving toward coat pockets that probably held things heavier than notebooks. Miguel appeared in the doorway. Behind him stood 6 ranch hands, all wearing gun belts, all watching the city men with eyes flat as frozen ponds. "Everything all right, boss." Mr. Whitmore was just leaving. Whitmore gathered his leather case, his dignity, his guards. At the door, he turned back. "Your mother would be ashamed of what you've become." Thomas set down the knife, walked to the fireplace where his mother's portrait reflected in the mirror above the mantel. "My mother died trying to become what other people wanted. danced herself to death for their approval. He touched the frame. I'd rather be alive and disappointing than dead and appropriate. After they left, after the carriage wheels faded and the ranch hands went back to work, Thomas stood staring at his mother's painting. The library smelled like burnt paper and possibilities. "You didn't tell him about the Denver lawyers," Eliza said. "Don't have Denver lawyers. You said I lied." He pulled the painting off the wall. Behind it, a safe was built into the stone. "But Whitmore doesn't know that." The safe opened with a combination Thomas's fingers knew without thinking. Inside were more papers, but also something else. Photographs. Daguerreotypes in silver frames. He handed one to Eliza. A young boy, maybe 8, standing beside the same woman from the portrait, but here she was smiling, her arm around the child, both of them in simple clothes, standing in front of what looked like a vegetable garden. "Before," Thomas said, "before the money got bigger, before Father decided we needed to be important." "She looks happy." She was. We both were. He put the photographs back, pulled out a different document. Father's will, the real one, not the version Aunt Margaret has. Eliza read the relevant passage. "Should my son Thomas fail to marry by his 30th birthday, the estate passes to Margaret Whitmore, née Blackwood, to be held in trust for—" The next words made her throat close. "For Thomas's legitimate children, should any exist." "Children," she said. "If I have a child legitimate, born in wedlock, Aunt Margaret loses everything. The money goes into trust for the next generation. So she needs to prove the marriage is invalid, or—" Thomas closed the safe. "She needs to make sure there are no children." The portrait of his mother lay propped against the desk, in the lamplight. The diamonds at her throat looked like drops of frozen tears. "What are you going to do with it?" Thomas picked up the painting and studied his mother's face. Then he walked to the fireplace. The flames were still eating Whitmore's papers, hungry for more fuel. "Thomas, don't—" The painting hit the fire with a whoosh. The oils in the paint caught instantly, sending up blue and green flames. The woman in diamonds disappeared into smoke, leaving only the smell of turpentine and regret. "She's been watching me fail to be my father for 10 years, Thomas said. "I think she's suffered enough." Through the window, Eliza saw riders approaching, not from the road, from the south pasture, riding hard. Miguel burst through the door. "Boss, we got a problem." Thomas was already moving toward his gun belt. "What kind of problem?" "The kind where someone poisoned the water supply." Dead cattle lined the creek bank like broken furniture. Tom had knelt beside a yearling, his fingers checking the mouth, the eyes, the swollen tongue. The animal's lips were foam white, belly distended. 24 more lay scattered downstream, their TB brands dark against bloated hides. "Arsenic," he said, standing. "Maybe strychnine, enough to kill anything that drank after sunrise." Miguel held a bandana over his nose. The smell rolled off the water, sweet rot mixed with something chemical. "We moved the rest of the herd to the north pasture. But if they hit that water too, they won't." Thomas pulled off his gloves, studied the upstream bend where the poison would have entered. This was targeted. See the oil slick on the surface? They dumped it at the narrows, knowing it would pool here where the cattle drink. Eliza watched from the bank. Her stomach clenched with each breath of poisoned air. "The children, Rosa, and the others, they got their water from this creek." "The well supplies the houses," Thomas said, reading her face. "Different source. They're safe." But his hands shook as he rolled down his sleeves. Back at the house, men gathered in the yard, not just the ranch hands, neighbors too. The Hendersons, who Thomas had faced down in town. The Pattersons from the East Valley. Even Sheriff Watson, his badge catching the late afternoon light. Heard you had trouble, Watson said. Heard wrong. Thomas walked past them toward the house. Just dead cattle. Happens. 20 head doesn't just happen. Thomas stopped, turned. You here officially, Sheriff? Watson shifted his weight, boot leather creaking. Your aunt's lawyer filed papers this morning. Competency hearing set for next week. Judge Murphy's presiding. Murphy? Miguel spat tobacco juice. That bastard owes more favors than a Denver whore. Watch your mouth, Watson said, but his heart wasn't in it. Everyone knew about Murphy and Margaret Blackwood's connections. Thomas stood on his porch, looking at the gathered men. Some had worked for him, some had borrowed from him, some had watched him grow from the spoiled railroad prince to whatever he was now. Go home, he said. Nothing to see here. Boss, Miguel started. I said go home. The men dispersed slowly, reluctantly. Only Watson remained. Tom, the sheriff's voice dropped. Your aunt's got 3 doctors coming from San Francisco. They'll testify you're unfit, living below your station, marrying inappropriate women, destroying family property. That painting was worth $2,000. It was worth nothing, just oil and lies. The judge won't see it that way. Thomas laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The judge will see exactly what he's paid to see. Watson set his hat, headed for his horse. At the gate, he turned back. You got 1 week. Tom, whatever you're planning, better be good. The house went dark room by room as night fell. Eliza found Thomas in the library. Survey maps spread across the desk. His finger traced water rights, property lines, elevation marks. The competency papers sat to one side, weighted down with his knife. You're leaving. She didn't make it a question. Tonight, take what gold I can carry, head for Mexico, start over where the Blackwood name means nothing. Running, surviving. He rolled up a map, tied it with string. Miguel can manage the ranch. The workers will be fine. For how long your aunt will sell everything, evict the families, not my problem anymore. Eliza picked up the competency papers. The legal language swam before her eyes, but certain phrases stood out. Delusional behavior, inability to maintain proper social standards, marriage to an unsuitable woman of low birth. Running proves their point. Thomas's hands stilled on the maps. Staying proves it, too. Either way, they win. No. Eliza set down the papers. Fighting proves you're sane. Running proves you're not. Through the window came a sound horses. Thomas grabbed his rifle, but Eliza recognized the lead rider, Miguel, with something wrapped in canvas across his saddle. More horses. The ranch hands, one by one, emerging from darkness. Each man armed, each man grim-faced. They formed a half-circle in the yard, waiting. Thomas stepped onto the porch. I told you to go home. This is home. Miguel dismounted, pulled the canvas bundle free. It hit the ground with a metallic sound. Found this upstream. 50-pound sack of rat poison, industrial grade. Still has the shipping label. Under lamplight, the label showed clear Morrison General Goods. Millbrook, purchased by H. Whitmore, San Francisco. He's not even trying to hide it, someone said. Doesn't need to. Another answered. Judge won't care. Miguel stepped forward. Boss, we need to tell you something. The men shifted, uncomfortable. Finally, the foreman spoke. That winter storm 3 years back, when the Henderson place was buried, you dug them out, brought them here, fed them for 2 months. Never said nothing about it. Henderson himself stepped from the shadows. You could have let us freeze. Could have bought our land cheap come spring. Instead, you saved us. The Martinez family, someone else said. When their baby died, you paid for the doctor, The funeral, everything. My boy's leg. Another voice. When the horse crushed it, you rode to Denver yourself. Brought back a real doctor. Story after story. Debts paid, families saved, kindnesses done in silence. Thomas stood frozen as the men laid out his secrets, like evidence in a trial. We stand with Blackwood, Miguel said finally. Whatever comes. Thomas's eyes caught the lamplight, went bright and wet. He wiped them with the back of his hand, angry at the betrayal of his own face. This isn't your fight. Hell, it isn't. Watson had returned, badge off, gun on. I've been sheriff here 12 years, seen a lot of rich men, never seen one who lived on $20 a month so his workers' children could have school books. Eliza pulled the account ledger from Thomas's desk, opened it to the page Maria had shown her. Thomas's personal expenses for the year $240. The school supplies alone $300. Medical costs for workers $500. Anonymous donations to the church $1,000. You live like a pauper and give like a king, she said. That's not insanity. That's conscience. Conscience doesn't win court case. No, but this might. Watson pulled out his own bundle of papers. Turns out your aunt's not the only one who can gather evidence. These are sworn statements from everyone you've helped. 37 families willing to testify. Thomas looked at the papers, then at the men in his yard, men who'd ridden through darkness to stand with rifles in his defense. It won't matter. Murphy's bought and paid for. Maybe, Watson said. But there's another judge, federal circuit judge, rides through next week. If we can delay the hearing. How? Watson smiled. Leave that to me. You just focus on proving you're sane. The men began dispersing, but not leaving. They took positions around the property guards at the well, the remaining cattle, the roads, without being asked, without being paid. They formed a wall of loyalty around the ranch. Inside, Eliza found Thomas in the kitchen at midnight, teaching Rosa's brother to read. The boy, maybe 6, held the pencil wrong, tongue stuck out in concentration. C-A-T, the boy spelled slowly. Good. Now what does it spell? Cat. Thomas smiled the first real smile Eliza had seen from him. Perfect. Now try this one. Eliza watched them work through simple words. The boy's delight at each success. Thomas's patience with each mistake. This man who could survey land and calculate water rights, teaching a Mexican child to read at his kitchen table. Why didn't you just marry someone suitable? She asked when the boy had gone home. Thomas looked up from the primer. Define suitable. Rich. Connected. Someone your aunt would approve of. Someone who'd see the ranch as an investment, the workers as expenses, the children as someone else's problem. He closed the book as carefully. I'd rather be declared insane than become my father. Through the window, a lantern bobbed across the yard. Miguel, checking on the guards. Another light answered from the barn, then another from the road. The ranch was surrounded by loyal men, all risking their jobs, their futures, for Thomas Blackwood. They love you, Eliza said. They love the idea that someone like me could choose to be different. He stood, put away the primer. Tomorrow, Whitmore will come back with the sheriff, force us to accept the hearing date. We need to be ready. With what character witnesses won't matter if the judge is bought. Thomas pulled out his survey maps again, spread them across the table. His finger traced lines Eliza couldn't understand, marks that meant nothing to her. With these surveys, proof. He pointed to specific markings. Every improvement I've made, every water right negotiated, every boundary dispute settled, 5 years of turning wasteland into prosperity. An insane man couldn't do this. Could a spoiled railroad heir? Thomas's finger stopped moving. He looked at her across the table, lamplight throwing shadows across his face. "That's what I need to find out." Outside, a horse whinnied, then another. The guards were shouting. Miguel burst through the door. "Boss, riders coming! Lots of them!" Thomas grabbed his rifle. "Through the window!" Eliza counted torches. 10, 20, more. They moved down the mountain road like a river of fire. "Who?" she asked. Thomas's face had gone stone still. "My aunt. She's brought an army." The courtroom smelled like tobacco spit and wet wool. Eliza sat on the hard bench. Her good dress, the one that wasn't stained with trail dust, already damp with sweat. The room was packed, every seat filled, more people standing along the walls. Half of Millbrook had come to watch Thomas Blackwood get declared insane. Judge Murphy sat behind his desk like a toad on a lily pad. His face had that particular shine of a man who'd been drinking since breakfast. The gavel in his hand looked too heavy for his soft fingers. "The matter before us?" Murphy read from papers Whitmore had obviously written for him. "Is the mental competency of Thomas Blackwood and the validity of his recent marriage." Thomas sat beside Eliza, wearing the suit Miguel had found in the back of his closet. It still fit, mostly. 5 years of ranch work had broadened his shoulders, thickened his hands. He looked like a laborer dressed in a gentleman's clothes, which, Eliza supposed, he was. Whitmore stood. His new suit was blue today, expensive enough to feed a family for a year. "Your Honor, we present 3 distinguished physicians from San Francisco." The doctors filed in. Gray beards, gold watch chains, the kind of careful movements that came from never lifting anything heavier than a pen. They arranged themselves like crows on a fence. "To Morrison," Whitmore began, "you examined Mr. Blackwood's living conditions." "I did." Morrison's voice carried the authority of expensive education. "The subject lives well below his social station. His personal quarters lack basic amenities expected of his class. His clothing is inappropriate. His associations are unfortunate, meaning he associates primarily with Mexican laborers and their families. He eats with them, works beside them. This represents a clear break from reality regarding social boundaries." The crowd murmured. Mrs. Henderson nodded so hard her hat feathers shook. "To Fitzgerald," Whitmore continued, "your assessment, classic dementia," Fitzgerald said without looking at Thomas. "The subject destroyed valuable family property, a painting worth thousands. He married drastically beneath his station. He maintains delusions of being a common rancher when he's heir to a fortune. These are not the actions of a sound mind." And Dr. Whitley, the third doctor, adjusted his spectacles. "The subject shows signs of moral insanity. He gives away money irrationally. He educates Mexican children, encouraging them above their natural station. He buried vagrants at personal expense. This suggests a fundamental break with rational economic thinking," Whitmore smiled. "Your Honor, these experts confirm what we've suspected. Thomas Blackwood is mentally unfit to manage his inheritance. We request immediate declaration of incompetence and annulment of his marriage." Murphy raised his gavel, ready to strike. "Wait!" Eliza stood. The word came out before she'd planned it. Murphy's gavel hung in the air. "Mrs. Blackwood, I have something to say." Whitmore laughed. "Your Honor, this woman has no standing. She's the wife in question," Watson said from the back of the room. He'd positioned himself by the door, a badge visible but gun more visible. "She has every right to speak." Murphy's face went red, then purple. But the crowd was watching, waiting. "Make it quick," he growled. Eliza walked to the front. Her boots, the ones Thomas had cleaned that first night on the trail, clicked against the floorboards. She pulled papers from her bag. Not legal documents. Better. These are Mr. Blackwood's personal accounts. She opened the ledger. Last year, he spent $240 on himself. He spent $3,000 on workers' medical care, education, and burial costs. Proof of insanity, Whitmore said. No rational man. He prevented 3 range wars through negotiation. She pulled out more papers, the sworn statements Watson had gathered. 37 families are alive because of his interventions, all done without violence, without courts, without forcing anyone from their land. She turned to the doctors. You say he lives below his station. I say he lives exactly at his station, the station of a working rancher. You say he married beneath him. I say he married someone who sees his worth beyond his wallet. Your Honor, Whitmore interrupted this emotional appeal. The door opened. Miguel entered, followed by a line of people, ranch workers, their wives, their children, the Hendersons, the Pattersons, even Mrs. Morrison from the general store. They filed in silently, filling every available space. What is this? Murphy demanded. These are the people Thomas Blackwood has helped, Watson said. They're here to testify. I didn't approve any witnesses. Federal law says competency hearings are public matters. Watson pulled out a law book, had it marked. Any citizen can offer testimony. Murphy's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Maria stepped forward first. Senor Thomas delivered my grandchild when the doctor wouldn't come. Baby would have died. Henderson came next, hat in his hands. Winter of '82. We were buried in snow. Thomas dug us out, fed us, asked nothing in return. We'd have starved. One by one, they spoke. The widow, whose husband Thomas buried. The boy whose broken leg Thomas had paid to fix. The families whose water rights Thomas had negotiated, saving their farms. Dr. Morrison stood. Your Honor, these are exactly the delusions we're describing. Delusions. Eliza pulled out a final stack of papers. These are water surveys, property assessments, improvement records, all completed by Thomas Blackwood. Tell me, Dr. Morrison, could an insane man calculate water flow across 40,000 acres? Could a delusional man negotiate contracts that saved 12 farms from bankruptcy? She spread the surveys across Murphy's desk. Thomas's neat handwriting, his precise calculations, his careful plans for irrigation and development. This ranch produces more cattle per acre than any in the territory. The water systems Thomas designed have never failed, even in drought. The school he built for Mexicans, Whitmore spat, for children. Eliza faced the crowd. He built a school for children who had no other chance at education. If that's insanity, then maybe we need more insane people. The crowd stirred. Someone in the back started clapping, then another. Murphy banged his gavel, but the sound was lost in the growing applause. Order, I'll clear this courtroom. The applause died, but the damage was done. Murphy's authority had cracked like ice in spring. Watson stepped forward. Your Honor, there's one more thing. He pulled out a telegram. This came this morning. Federal Circuit Judge Harrison will be here tomorrow. He's agreed to review this case if you're uncertain about your ruling. Murphy's face went white. Federal judges didn't care about local favors. They cared about law. That won't be necessary. To Murphy's voice came out strangled. Based on the evidence presented, I find no grounds for declaring Thomas Blackwood incompetent. The marriage stands as valid. Whitmore shot to his feet. Your Honor, Mrs. Blackwood has promised what? Murphy looked between them, understanding dawning on his face. Mr. Whitmore, did you attempt to bribe Mrs. Blackwood? That is, because that would be a federal crime, interfering with a legal marriage through coercion. Whitmore's mouth snapped shut. Murphy raised his gavel. This court finds Thomas Blackwood mentally competent and his marriage legally binding. Case dismissed. The gavel came down with a crack like thunder. The courtroom erupted. People surging forward, hands reaching for Thomas, for Eliza. Miguel was there, pounding Thomas on the back, Maria crying into her handkerchief. Even Henderson pumped Thomas's hand, grinning like they'd been friends for years. Through the crowd, Eliza saw Whitmore pushing toward the door. He stopped beside her, close enough that she could smell his pomade. This isn't over, he said quietly. The will has other provisions, other requirements. Such as, his smile was thin as paper. Children, Mrs. Blackwood, the inheritance requires legitimate children. And given your husband's preferences for Mexicans over his own kind, I doubt that's likely. He left before Eliza could respond. The crowd carried them from the courthouse into the street. Someone had brought out bottles, someone else a fiddle. It was becoming a celebration, the kind that would last until dawn. But Thomas stood apart, watching the mountains. "We won," Eliza said. "The first round." He turned to her. "Whitmore's right. The will requires children. Legitimate heirs. Then we have children." Thomas looked at her, really looked at her. They'd been married 5 days, shared a trail, a house, a fight, but not a bed. "That's not why I married you," he said. "I know." Eliza took his hand, that smooth, uncalloused hand that had held a knife so steady. "But it might be why I stay." Something shifted in his face. Hope, maybe, or fear. Before he could speak, Rosa ran up, tugging at Eliza's skirt. Senora, the school." "What about the school? There's smoke." Someone set fire to the school. The school was already gone. Eliza stood with Thomas, watching the last wall collapse inward, sending sparks into the night sky like failed prayers. The bell tower fell last, the bell itself clanging once as it hit the ground. Rosa and the other children huddled against their mothers. Nobody cried. They'd learned young that crying didn't rebuild what was lost. "Coal oil," Miguel said, kicking at a burned can, splashed on every wall. Thomas picked up a book, half burned, pages black at the edges, McGuffey's Third Reader. He'd ordered it from Denver, paid extra for quick shipping. "At least it happened at night," Watson said. "Nobody hurt." But Thomas wasn't listening. He was walking through the ashes, counting something. His lips moved silently. Then he had turned to the gathered crowd. "Tomorrow morning, everyone here, bring tools." That was all. He walked back to the house, Eliza following. Inside, he went straight to his desk, pulled out paper, started sketching. His hand moved fast, sure. A floor plan emerged, larger than before, 2 rooms instead of 1. "Thomas?" He kept drawing, added windows, a second door, storage room for supplies. "Thomas, you can't rebuild tonight. Not rebuilding." He set down the pencil. "Building better." The next morning, before the sun cleared the mountains, wagons started arriving, not just from the ranch, from town, too. Henderson brought lumber he'd been saving for a new barn. Patterson had nails, a whole keg. Mrs. Morrison, who'd spat at them in the street, brought glass for windows. "Why?" Eliza asked her. Mrs. Morrison's face was hard to read. My grandmother couldn't read, died not knowing what her own marriage certificate said. Maybe it's time things changed. "They raised the frame in a day. 30 men working while women cooked. Children hauled water. Thomas worked beside them, those gentlemen's hands finally earning calluses. When a beam needed lifting, he lifted. When a nail needed driving, he drove. Sheriff Watson worked the saw. Judge Murphy's wife, nobody expected her, brought curtains she'd sewn herself. "My husband's a fool," she said quietly to Eliza. "But I'm not." 3 days. 3 days to build what hate had burned in 3 minutes. The new school was bigger, stronger, stone foundation this time, iron stove instead of wood. And books, everyone brought books, Bibles, almanacs, old readers, even novels wrapped in brown paper the night they finished. The ranch threw a feast. Not a planned thing, it just happened. Someone brought a guitar, someone else a fiddle. Maria made tamales. The Irish family from upriver brought whiskey. Thomas found Eliza sitting on the new school steps, watching Rosa teach the younger girls to dance. "We did it," she said. "They did it." Thomas sat beside her, close enough their shoulders touched. "I just drew the plans." Music drifted across the valley. Spanish guitars mixing with Irish fiddles, children dancing with parents. No lines drawn between Mexican and white. Tomorrow there would be lines again. Tonight there weren't. "I have something for you." Thomas pulled papers from his coat, legal documents, properly witnessed. Eliza read by lantern light, deed transfer, half the ranch in her name. "Thomas, I can't. Partnership, not ownership." He took her hand, the one wearing his too loose ring. "You saved this place as much as I did." She signed where he indicated. Her hand shook slightly. When she looked up, he was watching her with those calculating eyes that had learned to show warmth. "There's something else," he said. 1 year later, Eliza stood in the same spot, but everything had changed. The school bell rang new bell, bright brass from Denver. Children ran from all directions. Not just 17 now, 28, with more coming. Word had spread. The Blackwood School took everyone. Rosa read from the board, her English clear and confident. The cat sat on the mat. "Very good," Eliza said, one hand on her swollen belly. 7 months along, carrying low. Maria said that meant a boy. Through the window, she could see Thomas with the older boys, teaching them to survey. He had them measuring the corral, calculating angles, arguing about numbers. His sleeves were rolled up, shirt dusty. He looked nothing like the mountain man who'd stood in her mother's kitchen that desperate night. "Mrs. Blackwood?" Eliza turned. A man she didn't recognize stood in the doorway. City clothes? Doctor's bag. "Dr. Phillips, from Denver. Your husband wrote about establishing a clinic." The medical building was already framed, waiting for the doctor's approval. Thomas had insisted on a modern equipment, surgical tools, medicine cabinet, even one of those new sterilization units from Germany. "The salary he's offering," Dr. Phillips said, looking at the mountains, the clean air, the children playing. "It's generous. He believes in paying what things are worth." That afternoon, her parents arrived. The journey from Millbrook took only a day. Now Thomas had improved the road, built a proper bridge. Her father climbed down from the wagon, older looking but steadier. The farm was saved, thriving even. Thomas had arranged for new seed, better equipment, even helped negotiate contracts with the Army for grain supplies. "Eliza!" Her mother held her at arm's length, studying the pregnancy, the good dress, the color in her cheeks. "You look happy," her father supplied. He was watching Thomas, who was teaching a boy, Henderson's son, to read from a primer. "See how the letters work together," Thomas said patiently. "C-A-T, cat." The boy sounded it out slowly, then faster. His face lit up with understanding. "He's good with children," Eliza's father said quietly. "He is." They watched Thomas work with infinite patience, never rushing, never criticizing. When the boy stumbled, Thomas simply started again. "I was wrong about him," her father said. "Wrong about what makes a man worthwhile. No, you were wrong about worth." That evening, a letter arrived, expensive paper, Margaret Blackwood's seal. Eliza opened it while Thomas carved. He'd taken up whittling again. But now he made toys horses for the boys, dolls for the girls. The letter was long, wrapped in elaborate apologies and explanations. Margaret had reconsidered. Family was important. Perhaps she'd been hasty. If Thomas would consider returning to San Francisco. Taking his proper place, Eliza passed it to Thomas. He read it, face expressionless. "What do you want to do?" she asked. He stood, walked to the stove, the letter crumpled in his fist. He opened the fire door, tossed it in. They watched it burn, edges curling black, Margaret's promises turning to ash. "Garden could use the nutrients," he said. Later, he scooped the ashes into a bucket, scattered them over the vegetable plot behind the house. The tomatoes Maria had planted were already showing fruit. The sun dropped behind the mountains, painting everything gold. Thomas and Eliza sat on the porch in the 2 rocking chairs Miguel had made wedding present. He'd called them, though it had taken him a year to finish. No conversation, just the creak of wood, the distant sound of cattle, the evening birds. Thomas reached over, took her hand. His palm was rough now, calloused from real work. Inside her, the baby moved. She placed Thomas's hand on her belly, felt him go still as the child kicked. "Strong?" he said. "Like the father? Like the mother?" They sat as darkness settled over the valley. Lamps appeared in windows, the ranch houses, the workers' quarters, even the new teacher's cottage they'd built when a woman from Kansas had answered their advertisement. The Blackwood Ranch spread below them, not just surviving, but thriving. The school they built from ashes, the clinic that would open next month, the families that would never be driven off by poverty or prejudice. "Your aunt was right about one thing," Eliza said. "What's that?" "You are insane. Sane men don't give away fortunes to build schools for other people's children." Thomas squeezed her hand. "Then I guess it's good I married someone equally insane." The stars came out, one by one. Clear mountain stars, undimmed by city smoke. Rosa's brother ran past, chasing fireflies with a jar. His laughter echoed across the valley. "No regrets?" Thomas asked. Eliza thought about the desperate girl who'd married a stranger for $800, who'd discovered that the poorest-looking man in town was the richest in ways that mattered, who'd stood in a courtroom and fought for a life she hadn't known she wanted. None. The baby kicked again. Thomas's hand was still there, feeling each movement. His other hand stayed in hers, wedding ring warm between their palms. They rocked in glints, watching their land, their people, their life. The school bell caught the moonlight like a promise. Tomorrow it would ring again, calling children to learn. The next day and the next, some things were worth more than gold. Thomas had known it all along. Now Eliza knew it too. The chairs creaked in rhythm. Somewhere a guitar played. Mexican voices rose in harmony. The sound drifted across the valley like a blessing, like a beginning, like home. The truth about wealth isn't found in bank vaults or stock certificates. I learned that watching Thomas Blackwood teach a Mexican boy to read while his fortune gathered dust. Real richness lives in Rosa's laugh as she rings the school bell, in Miguel's calloused hands building desks, in Mrs. Morrison swallowing her pride to bring window glass. When Thomas scattered his aunt's burned letter over our tomato plants, he was planting something money can't buy: the knowledge that every child deserves to read, every family deserves dignity, every person deserves to be seen. This valley taught me that community isn't built with gold, but with shared suppers, borrowed tools, and showing up when the school burns down. Thomas knew what his father never learned, that true inheritance isn't what you leave behind in dollars, but in the lives you lift up, the bridges you build between people who thought they were different. Our daughter will grow up knowing this truth. This story was inspired by historical Western frontier narratives, created solely for entertainment purposes. This work does not condone, encourage, or promote any form of violence or harmful behavior. All characters and events are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental.